Thank you very much, Ron. I appreciate that. Get a round of applause for Ron. This team has done a lot of work. They're true transportation nerds, but that's okay. We all need it. We all need it. Well, guys, we're very excited now, transitioning our presentation a little bit to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, Gabe Klein, author of Startup City, and many, many other roles that he's had throughout the years. Gabe, former commissioner of Chicago, Washington, D.C., DOTs, most recently author of Startup City, inspiring private and public entrepreneurship, getting projects done and having fun. I don't know how you pull those three together, but I guess he's going to give us the magic sauce. But Gabe is truly an expert on not just urban design, but transportation. And, how really technology, which is this big, scary cloud out there, can really help improve our lives, improve our experiences, and ultimately improve our access and opportunities. So without any more delay, I'd like to introduce Gabe Klein to the stage, and thank you so much for being here, Gabe.
All right, good evening, everybody. Don't hate me for living in Washington, D.C. It's not all bad. And I grew up, I was talking to Brandon on the way here, I grew up in two very rural areas as a kid. And I grew up in a college town called Charlottesville before I moved to the city. I think it's important to understand that it doesn't matter what size your town or city is. What matters is the quality of life and the context, right? And the context is going to be a little bit different in various areas of your region. You've got very rural, you've got some downtown, you've got suburban, and that's okay. But we can make all of it better. And as we are building and rebuilding, we want to make sure that we're building resilience, right? We want to make sure that we're building infrastructure that's good for us. And I'll talk more about that. Often it's not. In many ways, our built environment is making us sick, to be completely honest. And so these guys really set me up well for my speech because it's really about future-proofing. There's a lot of shiny objects out there, and some of them are great, and some of them are just shiny objects. But we're going to talk about separating the wheat from the chaff and figuring out what's really important for the long term to make this a place that you want to live, that you want to raise your families, that your kids want to raise their families, and that you can bring more people here if you want to. So you have more tax base, right? More opportunity for growth, and more opportunity for people to do well. So you can substitute town or community or region in there. But we need to ask ourselves, what's the infrastructure that we need? And when we look at the infrastructure that we have, by the way, this is not unique to here. Everywhere I go around the country, it's the same question. Why have we built all this infrastructure that's at odds with what we need as people? And often, we're continuing to build infrastructure. We're continuing to expand highways. So we'll talk more about that. But let's set up a baseline here and talk about how we got here and what do things used to look like. Around the turn of the last century, the 19 teens and 20s, the transportation system was much more balanced. And there's an old saying that the best transportation plan is a good land use plan. Now what does that mean? That means if you do a really good land use plan, people don't have to travel that much day to day. And if they don't have to travel that much, then you don't have a lot of movement, and therefore you don't have a lot of congestion, you don't have a lot of greenhouse gases. So back in the day, people weren't traveling as much. And you can see in this picture, people cross the street whenever they want, right? And where they want. You see there's cyclists, there's pedestrians, there's people on streetcars. Most cities and towns had streetcars back then, and that's primarily how people got from neighborhood to neighborhood. What's also interesting about our streets, we tend to think of our streets today as places to move as many people as possible, as fast as possible, right? That's why we have fatalities. If you're doing 5, 10, 15 miles an hour, the chance of an injury or fatality is very low. When you're doing 50, 60, 70 in an arterial, and you hit something, it's very high. So what's interesting about this picture is it shows how our urban streets used to be used for commerce. This is where people met, where they hung out with their neighbors, where they shopped. There was a sense of community in the streets. It was not so much about moving people. Now, fast forward, things changed. We industrialized. Post-war, people came back and we had to put people to work. Put them to work building cars, building highways, building tract housing, building suburbs. There's a bit of almost like a social re-engineering of our way of life. We had rural and we had urban, and those were very normal. We've had cities for tens of thousands of years, going back to Syria or Rome. But this was all new in human history, and we've been on the planet for about 200,000 years in some form. But this is about 80 years old. This is all new. We've never done this before. So, at first we were just connecting our cities through more rural areas. And then we decided, hey, this is working so well, let's just drive the highways right through the cities. And let's just make them places for jobs, not necessarily places to live. And then some people were surprised that people left, which doesn't surprise me. And we moved people, we sort of sold people this idea of the American dream, and they moved to the suburbs. And so these were 750 square foot tract houses. Everybody got a car. And how many people in this room own a car? Raise your hand. All right, everybody. So the thing about a home in the United States is it's an appreciating asset. Generally, there are downturns. A car is always an appreciating asset, unless you have like a 1965 Corvette, right? So that meant a change in the economics of people's lives as well. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that this way of life has created for us, this way of life that we invented about 75, 80 years ago. So basically, we have a problem where our ecosystem around us over the last 110 years since the Industrial Revolution started is basically, it's creating a ecosystem that's not hospitable to human life. And then we have tension between government and the private sector. I'm a person that's a total capitalist. I'm a startup guy, and I worked in government. And so it was very interesting for me to see the differences on both sides. But the challenge is that companies focus primarily on short-term profits, quarter-to-quarter profits. Anybody been watching the stock market lately? And government focuses on long-term 2045 solutions. And they're not as good at moving fast. So there's inherently a disconnect there when we're trying to move our country or our community or our city forward. So here's some of the impacts of the last 110 years. And by the way, transportation is the #1 emitter of CO2 since 2016, for the first time since 1980. That's why transportation is such an important thing right now. So we have to get control over our land use, our pollution from vehicles. And some people say, well, hey, all we need is autonomous electric vehicles. And I'll tell you, I own an electric vehicle. The problem is there's more CO2 emitted from building my Tesla than there is from driving a fossil fuel powered vehicle. So it's, it's not just about driving cleaner vehicles. It's about having fewer vehicles, right? Fewer things that we have to build in factories. And we're seeing real impacts of this day in, day out. And it's hitting, not up here probably as much, it's hitting more like the South, the Southeast. Texas is getting hit really hard. But there's a real economic impact. So when you hear people say like, well, let's think about how much money we can make today, we'll deal with that tomorrow. The problem is that cost is going to be very, very, very high, right? It's like if you eat McDonald's cheeseburgers every single day, right? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, eventually you're going to be unhealthy. No offense to anybody that loves McDonald's. I like McDonald's. But the fact is you can't do it all the time. You can't drive all the time either. The other impact we're seeing is a lot of traffic deaths. What's fascinating to me, I'm in Canada quite a bit. Canada's not that much different than we are. I mean, the people are a bit nicer, right? They have Tim Hortons, we got Starbucks. But generally, when you're in Canada, it doesn't feel that much different. yet they have almost half the deaths per capita that we do on the roads. So they're doing something different in the way that they design their roads. And the other thing that's interesting, we have some of the best healthcare in the world, particularly like cancer treatments and stuff, but man, is it expensive. And we spend a lot per person. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to try to oversimplify it. But the fact that we have a very sedentary lifestyle, we drive everywhere, doesn't help. If you look at these other countries and you look at their transportation systems and how much they spend sedentary in cars, it's very different. So there are all these secondary and tertiary impacts of the decisions that we make around the investment in our transportation system. And then, to make it, to compound it, it's really hard to fix. Like, these are complicated. You can't just look at transportation in a silo, right? You can't just look at health in a silo. Everything's interrelated. And so it makes it really challenging, particularly when you have a built environment that is built to then change it. So let's not be too hard on ourselves. And that's why we have long-range plans. But there are also things you can do in the short term.